Well, Greg, when we were last visiting, we talked about a lot of things, getting established with a franchise, in this case, the Oilerie, and getting a location in the Woodlands area off 1488, and covered a lot of, I think, great nuts and bolts, soup to nuts type issues that every business goes through when they open up. Now we kind of come to some of the operational things. Now you're in business, you got a store open finally after 3 promised dates and really a year and a half of wait, and the business is operating. What are some of the operational issues? I know you talked a little bit about products, finding sources for products. Obviously, you're in a business of buying and reselling. That's got to be an important issue for you every day.
Absolutely. Well, we have an approved vendor list, and so like our oils are going to come from that one source, and then some of the ancillary products also. But then it comes to supplies, and they had all these recommended vendors and so what, but just the cost involved in those were shipping costs were astronomical because a lot of these were coming from the Midwest. Well, that's great for headquarters, but it doesn't really help me a whole lot. So using my vast experience as a buyer for various companies, I just went online and started sourcing out as much as I can and then would factor in the bottom line, see what it's going to cost me per piece. I've been able to reduce cost on a number of items. And this could be as mundane as the jars we use for our spices, to the shrink wrap for our gift baskets, just all sorts of different things like that where I could narrow it down. And every spring we do this. One year we changed internet and phone providers because we got a huge reduction. Because every dollar we don't spend means that's 2 I don't have to make. So that's really what we're trying to do there. And it was pretty eye-opening for my wife to see us go all through that, being that she's not from the retail environment. But it's essential to do that each spring. I always spend a little bit of time checking for some things. Or if a company happens to go out of business, then I'll start looking for that also. But it all goes back to what I learned at Soundwaves.
Well, and I got to congratulate you, so to speak, or give you kudos. You do it on a scheduled basis. Too often I go into small businesses and work with people, and they're willy-nilly checking, in this case, the discussion on products and costs, and it just hit and miss. It just happens all the time whenever a salesman calls or something pops up in their email. I think that it needs the approach you have, methodical, scheduled basis. Of course, you mentioned if someone goes out of business, there may be particular things to pick up at that moment. But the idea that you thoroughly analyze your pricing, and you made another great point, I love it. $2 you don't have to bring in for every dollar you save. And I think a lot of business people, yes, the bottom line is the important number, but the revenue at the top, realizing that I've got to go sell more in order to pay more for what I'm doing. And it works at both ends of that spectrum, at the top and the bottom.
Yes, it does. And, it's just, you got to know your numbers. I mean, I've been told this all my life. And, when you are doing it on your own, it's just so much more important to do that. I would go in as a district manager in previous lives to a location and ask somebody their numbers, and they wouldn't know it, and it was just like, I've got the wrong people in here. You've got to know your numbers. It's very, very simple. But, you've also got to be, invested in it. And there are people who own a business and really are doing it as a hobby. They aren't invested in it. And it just blows my mind why you would want to do that. I don't know. It just... It's boggling at times, some of the approach that I would get some people, but I will tell you this, you've got to know your numbers because it affects every facet.
Basically, it was a family thing originally, and he was, I guess, the 3rd generation at that point. Multiple stores. But at any point into the month, whatever, he could tell you what his numbers were. He didn't need to wait for the financial P&L to be printed out. He could give you a pretty good feel. And in the middle of the month, he'd say, looks like we're going to do well if the last 2 weeks just stay the same. He knew the numbers for the overall operation. And that really sank in to me, knowing your numbers when you're making decisions. Obviously, the printed statement's important, but it's always delayed 5, 10 days, whatever. And you're making decisions, operational decisions, based on those numbers.
Absolutely. Yeah. And I'm always comparing them. I mean, at the start of the year, I come up with a budget, and a sales goal for each of my months, all based on last year's. And speaking of last year, we kicked it. We basically, just slammed every month. There was one month that did not make it as far as beating, the previous year's numbers by a substantial amount. This year, unfortunately, we're not as fortunate. We've had just 2 months where we've been over it. But on the other hand, every month beat the first year. So it's just we're right in between there. Could we have expected to continue with that galloping as we were? One would love to, but you don't always do it. As long as we're not falling back too far, and that's also where cutting those expenses make the difference. Keeps the doors open.
Makes a lot of sense. I want to talk, if we can, for a moment. You and your business, you and Joanna received, I think, some wonderful recognition, and I think that's important to every business to receive outside recognition. In this case, your business, you and Joanna, were selected in 2017 Small Business of the Year by the local Chamber of Commerce. And this is a chamber, for those listening that are not familiar with the area, the Woodlands Chamber, I believe, is the second largest chamber in the greater Houston area. So this is a big organization, and this had to be quite an honor. How did that impact your business and your approach, you and Joanna, your state of mind and things like that?
Well, as far as state of mind and approach, it definitely solidified and validated what we were doing. No doubt about it. And yeah, you get some good chest thumping, out of it. But to be recognized, and because you always wonder, am I doing the right thing? That kind of validation was really, really important. Unfortunately, it didn't exactly benefit our sales as much as one would hope. But at the same time, it solidified what we were doing, knowing for the fact that, hey, the two of us have got the right approach. We're going down this road together, and we're doing things the right way. And it's definitely nice to be recognized. There's no doubt about that.
And just so people understand, these are the kind of recognitions that you don't put yourself up for. Somebody else puts you up. I mean, it's somebody's It's not something you're in a competition that you enter into. And you made a comment about that in some information you gave me. And I think the idea that you're recognized by outside, and I think every business should strive, not that you have to push, but build the kind of business that others look at. I feel they want to emulate it. The folks that vote on these things saying, hey, they're doing a great job there. I would like to have my business like that business. So it's a great, as you said, validation, but it's other businesses in the community want to be like your business. And I think every business should strive, indirectly, if you will, to be in that posture. One of the other things you did is you talk about special events and drawing attention to your business. You had our local congressman, Kevin Brady, who previously was the chairman of the Budget Committee, Ways and Means Committee in Congress, so he's well known throughout the country as well as locally. Tell us about that visit and how that came about and how others might achieve because that obviously brought a lot of recognition to your business.
Absolutely. It was outstanding. And one thing I really appreciate about Congressman Brady is that he is approachable. He's always in the community. Joanna and I had met him at the polls the previous year, voting in the runoff that he was no longer even involved in. He'd already won the primary, but he came back from the Hill to vote for it. And we spoke to him for a while, and I talked about how important it was to see him out here, and he loved it. But it was really cool. His approach was, yes, I can get to Capitol Hill. I've got to be back on Tuesday for a vote, but I'm here now. And that was Monday. But how that all came about was I got a phone call from the reporter from Community Impact, and it was the same reporter who interviewed me when we opened, and wanted to know how the impact of the recent tax cuts, how they had affected me. Well, we joked about how we yet to necessarily need them in our business because we're still right in that pre-profit stage. We're getting dang close, but we're not there yet. But what affected us was the positive outlook everyone in the community had about the economy based on, these new tax laws that came in. And so we were seeing very good increases in our business. And at that time, I really hadn't started doing a lot of shows yet. So this was early in last year, January, February. But I'd only done a couple of shows in January and just started in March. And then that got published. A week or so later, I get a phone call from someone from the Brady office wanting to know, hey, basically vetting me again to make sure that, hey, it wasn't just a misquote or anything, and wanted to know what all my thoughts were on it. And then about 2 weeks later, he comes in and spends a good 2 hours with us.
Oh, wow.
Taped us, put it on his Facebook page, gave us a lot of recognition and just a lot of great media presence. And it was just great. He appreciated the fact that, a local business had benefited from his work, because, yes, at that time he was chairman of the House Ways and Means Committee and very influential. But also, that bill doesn't pass without him, and so that was really cool about it. So I saw later on that he was going to a ton of other businesses, but I think I was the very first one. And let me tell you, that's a dang good feeling. But it all started with just simply being interviewed, someone reading it, calling us up, and then boom, he wanted to come out and appreciate and show his appreciation to his local businesses and his constituents. And I thought that was great.
You know, I sit here and listen to your story, and you and I've talked about your story to some extent. I learn something new every time we visit, but the idea that you're basically building blocks. He was a building block in your recognition in the community. You've done a great job networking. We've talked about that in previous show. Used that time that you were given that was unexpected and connected with everybody in the business community, and were able to leverage that into business once you were able to get open. And now you've been established as the business of the year through the local chamber. Now you've had the congressman come in who's, got this great recognition for this tax bill, chairman of the committee, that kind of thing. And he is one that's always out there and connecting and so on and so forth. You've done a wonderful job in that. Marketing wise, though, you've done something recently. And the one thing I appreciate, you're always looking for new opportunities as a general proposition to where you take your business. You started doing events. Can you kind of touch on that briefly and tell us some of the pros and cons that you learned by experience?
Absolutely. Last year we were starting to see, a couple of downfalls here and there. Got to go out and answer the challenge. You've got to get the word out. We're the only oilery in the state of Texas. Our headquarters is up in the Midwest, and there's a lot of name recognition. We don't have that here. Well, how do you combat that? You get out in the areas. And what we do is I go basically as far as I can, as long as I can come home at night. I will not spend the night on the road. That's something I promised Joanna I will not be doing. So I go out like this past weekend. I had a morning event at Belleville on Saturday. Then I went in the evening, went to Pearland. Those are a good long way from the house. But let me tell you, there's people who've never heard about us that now are prospectively going to be our customer coming up. Last year in the Christmas season, because we ask everybody who walks in the door how they ever heard about us the first time, tons of people came in as a direct result of going to these shows. So not everyone was a great, grand slam while I was there, but then they added on the value by coming back into the store or giving us a mail order. Belleville is extremely available, but Bay City, Nacogdoches, Luling, all these little cities that are out there don't have what I'm selling in their area. Now, they can travel to Austin or other cities where they're at, but I'm bringing it to them, and then they, taste our great stuff and then become converted. And then they start calling us and adding into our business, and our growth from last year was strictly predicated by doing the shows. Every dollar we made over the previous year can be attributed to what we did at the shows.
So a new way to market the business. You didn't buy a billboard. You didn't go on the radio. You went out and saw the events, meaning different kinds of charity events, some for-profit events, some farmers markets, wherever you could feel or you felt your product would be welcomed and receive the kind of exposure. And you did how many events in the last 12 months?
Well, last year I did 61, and as of this weekend, I just did my 55th for this year.
For this year,
so,
wow.
And we're on pace to be doing about 120, it looks like, this year. But what I found is that when you have a nonprofit or, say, a women's club, something like that, they're the folks who really you get the best results from because they're bringing people in for their show to benefit the community. Cy-Fair Women's Club does Shop to You Drop in the Berry Center every September, and they give out scholarships to area students from their proceeds that they get. So they're benefiting the community, and at the same time, you're getting a great response at the show. There are a few exceptions for the people who do it for profit, but by and large, most proprietors who are doing this as their business, you want to avoid. At least in my case, you do. That's been my experience.
Right.
They're a little bit higher. The traffic isn't as good because they're worried about their bottom line, whereas these nonprofits are worried about you being successful so that their charity can be successful. And that goes back to my involvement with the community. And so it really pays off, sort of wraps that all together. And keeping all the detailed notes that I do backs up everything my memory's telling me right now.
You said one important thing, and I kind of went past it, and you've just repeated it indirectly now, is that when you do a marketing effort, again, this year events, I think in previous years you worked corporate gift baskets and saw that business go way up, and then it started tailing off for various reasons. So you went and looked in your crystal ball, if you will, right, and discovered events and ran that out, but you measure everything. I mean, you've shared with me, you keep a spreadsheet, you keep numbers so that you can track what's really working because, right, we only have so many hours in a day. This, as you've alluded to, is a mom and pop business, like so many thousands and hundreds of thousands of businesses, millions in America. But by tracking what you're doing and the kind of return you're getting, you're able to make a better decision on where you spend your time.
Absolutely. And it goes back to just knowing your numbers. And while I've got a fairly good memory, believe me, the older I get, the more it's starting to fail. So let's keep track of it. Use the tools that are out there. Keeping a spreadsheet's not that hard. It's just a matter of keeping up with it, and the decisions made for you from the formulas that are in there. So it's there.
Well, I got to ask you the question now that we've kind of covered the waterfront in your business with marketing. Do you prepare any kind of marketing plan? Say, sit down like you do in the spring with your products. Do you sit down once a year, say, or maybe several times, but write down a plan that you, in this case, Joanne, your partner, can share and talk about the pros and cons? Or is this something you sort of pick an area like events and you just go after it?
A little bit of both, but first 2 years we had detailed, and I mean very detailed advertising programs that were sent up to corporate, and he had to approve each and every use of the logo, which is very common in a franchise. But we also found that a lot of the avenues, the traditional avenues that he required us to use, weren't producing the results we needed. We joke about standing on a street corner with dollar bills and getting better results. We have honed that down to one very, very successful digital billboard that I'm very, very pleased with, and it's locally owned, which is another thing I really like to do. Very pleased with that, but pretty much other than that, I've stopped on the advertising, and I put my budget into these events. But yes, Joanna and I pretty much on Sunday nights, we'll have a recap for the entire week. As we're sitting down having dinner, we're talking about, well, good and bad and ugly. And then, of course, just every night because, hey, we come home and we talk about the day, and a lot of those results come up. We talk about repeat customers and how they found us and things like that. But on Sunday nights, it's discussed at length because we have the week ending, we've got our results, and we talk about the good and the bad and sometimes the ugly.
One of my favorite phrases, the good, bad, and ugly. Well, before we kind of look at the future and what you're seeing down the road in your industry, because I think you've got some things that are in common directly or indirectly with a lot of business. One last question, and you mentioned you and your wife, your partner, Joanna, have a quote-unquote business meeting typically on Sunday night over dinner. How has it been? I mean, so many couples go into business and it just doesn't work because the personal life and the family life and the business life, they kind of, even though their skill sets may be complementary, it doesn't work. What does it take to make that partnership work in the business?
Working with your best friend every day. I've known Joanna for 21 years before we got married. And then we're coming up on our 25th wedding anniversary next
So you
week.
got a 46-year relationship.
Absolutely. And 3 years in the business, 25 years being married, hey, it don't get any better. So that's the cool thing.
Yeah, well, I the strength in the partnership, and I've been in some, and I definitely mentor people that are in various types of business partnerships, family businesses. The secret is the people and their willingness. And I grew up in a family business, multiple families. I learned the good, the bad, and ugly. So but it's a neat thing. I always encourage people if they're thinking about a family business. It's a neat thing if you can get the dynamics down and make it work. It's a step above just being successful in business, to be successful with someone in your family.
Absolutely, yes. You hit the head on the nutshell there, and thanks for giving me a little breather there. Yes, you're absolutely right. You're absolutely right. It's just been wonderful, and if someone has the opportunity, I would say go for it.
Yeah, you got to make it work. Well, let's take the last 4 or 5 minutes, whatever we have, talk about the future challenges in your business. You've already the first one that came to my mind. You've already touched on. You had a great year. Call it 2017, 2008. I mean, you just double-digit growth month over month, and then all of a sudden, you got to match or beat those numbers in the following year. Where do you go from there? I mean, are you trying to get back on track to have double-digit increases in 2019 and forward?
Absolutely, because one of these years we want to hire somebody. We'd love to have someone else come in there and give us a break now and again. As it is on the events, her youngest and then a buddy of mine will pitch in and help us out on that, but we don't have any employees. And yes, that would be our first step. To do that, we have to continue, adding to our sales. Also, though, we've got some challenges with some product availability. Our ancillary products have drastically changed of late. For reasons that have not completely been above board, we have lost a lot of our ancillary products that were through our franchisor. He's given us some reasons, and those reasons have not proven to be true, but we just had to accept it because we can't get them. And we're having to bring in a whole new line, and after you've spent these almost 3 years developing people looking for these products, I hate disappointing people. And when they drive to your store and get out of the car and come in with something in mind, and you have to tell them it's no longer available, there's not a lot of things worse than that. I mean, yes, you can overcome objections and turn them on to something else, but these people's purpose for coming to your store that day isn't there. That hurts, and so now we're trying to find some items that can simulate and get close to what they were, but we're having some challenges on that. I mean, roughly 96% of our ancillary product has vanished,
Boy, that's a difficult thing. That's like losing a vendor, just goes out of business one night, and you wake up the next day and you can't source a big part of your business of the products that you need. Corporate sales, that was something you tried a couple of years ago. Some success, I suggest, because I saw that working. I knew people who bought your baskets to make gifts and so on and so forth. But you mentioned in the information you provided me that those sales grew exponentially, but then the following year they sort of fell off. What was some of the reasoning? Why do you feel, and you keep numbers and data, what did it tell you about why they fell off?
Well, what I'm seeing now, especially like one of the dealerships that I'm working with, their sales are down, and so then that makes their purchase from me down.
Talking about automobiles.
Yes, yes, absolutely. And I'm looking at last year, and some of these are one half of what they ordered before, which means they're selling less and less of the items too. So that's where, say, a year after the tax cuts, I don't know if it's a slap in people's face or a wake-up call or what it is, but people's confidence in the economy now isn't as strong as it was last year, right after the initial surge of that. So some big ticket items aren't being bought. So that's my that's part of it. The other part is realtors. Another very large customer base has dropped off a bit, and part of that is that some folks have tell me that they have had to contribute a lot to help them make the purchase, things like that. So that takes away the excess funds they had that they were using. So now I'm going to go down tomorrow into Houston, and I'm going to check out. I'm just going to do a cold call tomorrow, but I'm going down to the Vespa dealership, Italian Cycles, and I'm just going to see what the heck we can do, if we can possibly work with these guys, because it's a great tie-in. Well, some of them are made in Vietnam, but most of them are still made in Italy, and they're made very, very close to where our balsamics are made. And we're going to see how that ties in. And all they can say is no, and I'm a man. I've been told no before, so, but I'm looking forward to that opportunity. But just something I'd never thought about before, but it's like, hey, let's go look for another opportunity and see what we can come up with.
What a great encouragement for folks that are looking at, especially what I call Main Street, which is the retail world. And the fact you can't sit on your hands. Today's world moves so fast, faster than it did 5-10 years ago, in my opinion, someone who's been out on the street, so to speak, for 40-50 years in various businesses. You can't sit on your hands, and you've got to go to the Vespa dealer. You got to look for new ways to distribute your product to compete, and there's some wonderful, wonderful business stories out there of small businesses that have adjusted and been so successful. And I think your story about the corporate sales, which, came from you to do versus just sitting behind the desk and waiting for people to walk into store. And now the events and going out to, 100+ events this year. That's a lot of work. You and I discussed that. It's a great story. Well, I want to finish up. We've got a minute or two left and talk about a threat to your business. And again, those are the things I always encourage my clients to try to prepare for the crisis. I call that crisis management. Preparation so it doesn't become a crisis or it's not as big, and that's the tariffs. Everyone listening to this program, I'm sure, is aware of tariffs from China and so on and so forth, but I understand that you're faced with, in your business, a 300% tariff on imported olive oil, which is the core business you're in. What do you do about that in a business? You're sitting there and all of a sudden you're looking at a 300% increase in tariff, which means a significant increase in your cost. What do you do with that?
Well, I'm going to try to come up and get some product before it all comes into play. No doubt about it. I have reached out to our franchisor, and I'm still waiting on that response to see what his guidance is going to be on that. Since we only have the one supplier, we are limited in that. So will he open up those avenues to say, hey, we can get some olive oil from other places? But part of our niche is the fact that we've got that one fourth-generation Italian master. So I doubt that's going to happen as far as allowing other things. So we're going to have to get some more product from him before it all happens. Now, in the meantime, we're also petitioning folks to sign the bill, or excuse me, petitioning against the bill. The North American Olive Oil Association is really striving with their lobbyists to have olive oil excluded from this. This is just a small portion of a huge tariff bill that's being aimed at the European Union. There's a lot of reasons for it, but none of them apply to olive oil. We just happen to be lumped in there because we're from Europe. So it's not just going to be Italian. It's going to be Greek. It's going to be Spanish, Tunisian. Well, they're in Africa, but still, they're part of the union as far as the olive oil goes. All the sources from overseas are going to be hurt. And let's be honest, while America does make olive oil, it's only 5% of the world supply. So yes, costs are going to go up if it passes. So we're going to keep our fingers crossed and petition as much as we can so that it doesn't happen. I've already reached out to Congressman Brady's office also and explained to him our position on it. And we're just going to have to hedge our bets, but at the same time, I am going to be prepared to be making a major purchase beforehand so that we can at least get through this Christmas season, and then we'll see what happens.
Well, in this situation, it's just the kind of thing that small businesses typically aren't well equipped to handle. And they pop up, and then this happens to be a tariff. It could be anything else. But the fact is that you're active, you're out there working, because every small business, in my opinion, needs to be connected some way, legislatively, politically, whatever, to stay in tune with things. And you obviously, from the visit of Congressman Brady and your connection with his office and the ability to communicate, strengthens you, in my opinion, when you go back and talk about this particular issue, because now you have a relationship. So my takeaway is you build relationships in all aspects of business, and right, wrong, or indifferent, one aspect is government, and you've got to have some relationships there. Well, Greg, I can't thank you enough. You've been a wonderful guest. You've got a wonderful business story, one that anyone that's thinking about going into business can benefit. Hearing some of the experiences and some of the surprises, because they're always going to happen, and yours may be unique to you, but they really aren't, particularly in your real estate and some other things. Those kind of curveballs come. In your case, though, they had a little speed on them, a little harder, I think, on the real estate particularly, and now tariff. If folks want to get in touch with you to ask you questions, because you've indicated you're available just to talk to people about business, which I appreciate, what's the best way for them to do that?
Yes, please stop on by the Oilerie, the Woodlands at 2400 FM 1488, and that's 3 miles off I-45. We're really easy to get to, and we are open from 10 to 6 Monday through Saturday. On Sunday, it's 12 to 5. And if you don't find me there, you're going to find my lovely wife, Joanna. And just stop in, leave your card if you miss me, speak to her. She's got a lot of knowledge also. She's picked up a ton of things in 3 years, let me tell you. And we're more than happy to spread our knowledge to help any of the small businesses here in town and, of course, develop a business relationship with you as well.
Well, thank you again. And I will tell people in the air, my wife, our house is full of your products. And it's because they're quality, wonderful products. My wife is quite the cook, takes a lot of interest in her cooking, and she identified early on. I introduced you to her to the store, but now it's a regular part of her routine and part of the food products that she uses in preparing our family meals. Well, ladies and gentlemen, that brings us to the end of this conversation, Soup to Nuts conversation. Starting a business, get ready for big surprises.